So now we're going to look at one more example of using the HTML video element or the HTML media element to do some cool stuff on a web page. And this particular example is going to talk a little bit or go into a little bit about how video transfers over the network. So we talked about how video is different from an image in the sense that you've got time-sensitive delivery, right? You need to get those bits before the video playback gets to it, otherwise playback is interrupted. And one of the things that's pretty common now that you see when using HTTP to deliver video over the network is this little slider thing here. We can see that it's showing us that this much of the video is already ready to be played. And when I hit the playback button, we're going to see that thing move because it's showing us that more of the video is available as we continue to play it. So in practice, we actually have access to that information. This part that's downloaded is called the buffer, right? And you've probably seen, or maybe you haven't. It used to be, you see this all the time with streaming video. You'd get a message that comes up, the video would stop, and the message comes up and says buffering, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then when it's done buffering, it starts to play again. And that's basically what this is. It's the amount of video you have on hand that you can play back while network activity goes on in the background to get more of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to use JavaScript to get at some of that data so that we can see what's happening with the buffering and we know how much video is available. Now, what I've just done is uncommented some HTML in our page, and what the HTML does that's important, we're going to create a div where we can output the number of seconds of video that's available for playback. And we're actually going to create a bar, a seek bar, that kind of resembles this thing here, that shows us graphically how much video is available. And we're going to put that right here in the page. And the way we've done this is to create a bar that's going to change color as it goes, like a progress bar. We've got a div. Let's actually look at the CSS for this. We've got a div called the seek bar, and it's 400 pixels wide. That's how wide the video player is, and 10 pixels high, and it's gray. And then we've got the bar that sits inside it that's going to show us the amount that's downloaded, and we've made that one green, and we've set its width to 0, which means initially you won't even see it. Let's see what this looks like on the page. I reload here, and here is the bar. You know, I said 400 pixels is the same width as the video player. Apparently that's not correct. But in any case, 400 pixels is how wide it is. Yeah, what happened with the, the video player ID is dogs. And that's 400 pixels wide. Okay, so we have our seek bar, which is gray, and then the downloaded bar, which is green. And of course, downloaded bar width is 0. We don't see anything now. And all we're going to do is, as the video comes down, we're just going to change the width property on the green bar, and that'll make it look like it's growing. You'll actually see it as a green bar growing across that page. Now, how are we going to do this? We're going to have to find out, as the video plays, well, we're going to need something that shows that video is downloading, and then we're going to need to be able to find out how much. Now, there's APIs for this, as you can imagine. If we go back to our HTML media element page, and I'm sorry, actually, we do need to look at events. We're going to need some kind of an event that's going to tell us when the download status has changed. And as it turns out, if we go down through this list, we're going to find that here in this progress event. The progress event is sent from time to time, undefined how long in between calls, in between triggers on that event. But it's basically information about the amount of media that's been downloaded so far. So the progress event is the thing we're going to listen to that's going to tell us, hey, something's changed in the download status, you better check it out. Now, we don't know yet where we're going to get that information from, but we know the event we're going to listen to in order to go to the next step, which is to find out how much video we have downloaded. So what I'm going to do is go in here. I can make this a little bigger. There we go. And I'm going to put in an event listener on our video element on the progress event. So that gives us at least a starting point that says, okay, so every time the progress changes, we're going to have the opportunity to do some code here. Now, what we need to find out now is a way to know how much of this video has buffered at any given time. And if we go looking through these, I could make you watch me browse, but I'll just go right to it because I know what it's called. It's called buffered, and it is a read-only property. You can't set it. It would be meaningless to set it, but you can read the ranges of the media that the browser has buffered at the moment that this property is accessed. So as soon as I check this property, it's going to tell me the range that's been accessed. And what it's going to return is this thing called a time range object. And if we look at a time range object, it has a start and it has an end that I can get. So we're going to get a start, we're going to get a time range back in the buffered property every time progress is called, and that's going to tell us what range has been available, right? The time range has a start and an end. So let's see what that looks like in the code. So first of all, what I'd like to do before we start playing with our progress bar, let's just output this information to the screen so we can see what it looks like. So I had a span in the page called buffered, and what we're going to do is we're going to get the buffered property, we're going to get the start of the time range, and we're going to get the end of the time range. And let's take a look. Let's just see if this works. So let's go in here to our video. I'm going to open up the console. Okay, just in case I get an error message, I'm going to want to see it. And let's go ahead and hit the play. All right, well, we're not getting anything here for time range. So what could be wrong? You know what? It was in the documentation that this thing takes a parameter. We have to give it an index of a range number. It's not really clear. They're not very specific about what the range number should be, but the examples they're giving here use 0. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's use 0 in here for range. It's not clear if that's going to help, but it conforms with their example if I do that. And let's play. Oh, and here we go. So here's our range. 0 is the start, and this number that keeps changing on us is the end of the range. That's how much of our, 67-second video has buffered so far. So we can see that the code essentially is working. All right, it's actually 68 seconds long, I guess. We can see that the code is working. We can see that when I stop the video, it actually appears to have buffered the whole thing. Now, a little explanation about using these zeros in this call. You may guess from the narrative that went along with the thinking process here that I'm not exactly sure what that 0 is for, or what would happen if I made it a different number. How many ranges are inside this object, and what would it mean if there's more than one range inside this object? It's just not clear from the documentation. It's not that uncommon when you're working with something like this that you don't have all the answers at the time you're asking, and sometimes you can dig into it through the documentation here and find the answers. Other times you can't. Maybe if I went to the working draft of the specification, I'd be able to tell more. But sometimes you also just have to kind of take a leap of faith and say, well, here's what their example looks like. Let me try that. And there's always going to be that edge of your knowledge, and the uncertainty of that is something that, in a way, you have to be a little bit comfortable with programming, a little bit comfortable with failure. So on your way to figuring out what's going to work. So in this case, we've made this work, and the only thing we have left to do is actually make this display as a bar in this graph that we wanted to. So what's that going to look like exactly? Well, I would say that what we need is a percentage of this span that we need to cover with our new bar. So I think we'd be looking at using two properties that we happen to have, which is we want the end time of the buffer, which we were seeing grow as the video played, divided by its duration. So if it's 68 seconds long and we're at 34 seconds, that's 50%, right? So we've got 50%. But it's 50% of what? We really probably be helpful. I suppose we could use 50% as a CSS value on that bar, on the width. But what we could also do to be more precise is actually multiply it by the width of the seek bar. And I can get that using jQuery, right? So we had a seek bar which contains a downloaded bar. So now I'm saying, let's take the percentage that's been downloaded and multiply it by the width of that bar, and that's going to be the width we're looking for. And then we can just use jQuery to make the downloaded bar that wide. So by doing this, we're listening for a progress event, which fires every time the browser's got something to tell us about how much video was downloaded. And then we're using the buffered property on the video element to find out the time range that's available to play, which in this case has a start and an end. And then we're using that end as a way to figure out how close we are to the duration, right? The end gives us a time, but we know the duration, and from that we can figure out the percentage that's downloaded. And we reload to take a look at this. As soon as I start to play, well, we can see already we've got our 20 seconds available. We can see the green bar, and the green bar is moving as the end of that time range changes. So this is the kind of thing, as I mentioned at the beginning, this will only work if you're actually streaming across a network. If you're playing from local file, there is no buffering, right? So you can see I have this running at localhost. It's running on a web server, and that's required in order to see this effect happen. And that concludes our looking at the HTML video element. Next, we're going to jump into the JW player.